So this is how the science of language and science of the mind links for me with the deeper cosmological metaphysical problems, and we go to the sacred codes, sacred, the Bibles and of different religions, and there's always this emphasis on language and how language creates reality and how the world is spoken into existence and so on. And now see where this kind of paradigm shift where communication seems to be a big problem with all this ideology floating around and kind of corrupting communities and making people fall into silos of black or white thinking. And there's a breakdown of communication, which it comes hand in hand with the breakdown of cognition and understanding anything, just having the basis for any understanding, because it's just been weaponized to such a great extent, the speech.
I love doing things by myself because I don't have to worry about all the communication and all the rest of it. But you gotta collaborate and deal with people that are who add value. But and the more value someone adds, sometimes the more challenging they can be. It's the people on the side who just agree with you all the time. They don't break you. They don't make you wake up and ask questions and make you turn in your sleep. But that's what you need, unfortunately. So yeah.
Exactly, and then we go into because then that requires you to work on yourself, to be able to take criticism and to reflect on and be aware of your blind spots and so on, and address your trauma and heal the stuff that needs healing. And so it's really a psycho-spiritual process, isn't it? Where everyone in the world is now. Because what I have found most recently, which seems to be that thing that you can put label on, and it incorporates this curious mindset that we have, and which involves circling around different areas and different disciplines, is a systemic approach, basically, to anything, systems thinking. So I'm going to do this training with Nora Bateson in July, actually. And I'm quite excited going face to face and meeting some people, and because that I find it is a scientific framework which acknowledges the Eastern traditions and the religious nature of human beings as such, in a non-woo way, right? So you don't scare the big bosses with too much metaphysics, but then still, don't we need the thing through which is our main thing, and then we can use these different prisms, these different lenses that we like to explore and learn different areas. And I think for me, because to make sense, to consolidate all that experience that I have in terms of my academic, it's basically a cognitive science, because it's philosophy, psychology, and language together. And I've done music as well, and religious studies, all of that. But then and match that to the market. What is it in it that matches to the market needs, which is communication? Like what you're saying, what Lex Friedman says, we have to radically improve our coordination capacity as human beings of goodwill. So we want to change the world for the better, and then we need to be able to communicate with others, especially with others with different views from our own, so we can actually learn better. And I think communication is something that even the World Economic Forum lists as the first skill for the 21st century, right? And many HR kind of clusters, they say communication is the first thing. And it involves everything. It involves emotional intelligence, informational literacy, and kind of dealing with yourself, and language itself, the use of language in a not only as a tool, because then it can become a weapon even if you don't realize it, but as a tool that is you treat it as sacred in a way. You treat it as not just the interface between thought and speech, but as you have to bind it with some ethical sense that you use your speech for the good rather than for the bad. So there is an ethical component, which is very difficult now, I think, for people, because we're in such a techno-scientific culture that people think about everything in a technological sense, like back to Heidegger, like he already identified it 70 years ago or so. And I think it is very important to just talk about this and scale this conversation about how language is, because first of all, is the interface of thinking, and then if we don't care about truthfulness and realness, of our speech, then we end up bullshitting ourselves and we go to bullshit, right? Because it's just a tool, it's just a means to ends. No, language has to be that ultimate expression of the reason that is inherent in the structure of the cosmos itself. So this is how the science of language and science of the mind links for me with the deeper cosmological metaphysical problems, and we go to the sacred codes, sacred, the Bibles and of different religions, and there's always this emphasis on language and how language creates reality and how the world is spoken into existence and so on. And now see where this kind of paradigm shift where communication seems to be a big problem with all this ideology floating around and kind of corrupting communities and making people fall into silos of black or white thinking. And there's a breakdown of communication, which it comes hand in hand with the breakdown of cognition and understanding anything, just having the basis for any understanding, because it's just been weaponized to such a great extent, the speech. Yeah, it's kind of feeding back to what you mentioned in the text.
Yeah. So for me, I don't see language just specifically the interface between brain and speech, or thought and speech. And the thing about morality, ethics, principles, weaponization, for me, it's unavoidable. There is no. It's even when you're holding your own logic and reason in mind, saying, "Well, I need to be considerate about how I use language and how I can weaponize it," and then we have an ethical framework that we aspire to maintain. That framework is built on certain presumptions that are not inherent in everybody in what we're relating to. And I think that because we've made it an interface between, because thought predominantly is a construction of mind, and thought is deduction and reasoning, analytical, rational reasoning. And even if you add on the metaphysical dimensions and the cosmology and all the rest of it, you're still trapped in a framework. And I get you need to do that at some point, but I think the whole issue is that you'll never come to an agreement on that within yourself. Well, for me, I mean, you say, okay, well, say for instance, I say, well, I need to be sure that I've considered this and I've considered that. It's an ever moving goalpost based on the environment, based on the individuals, based on the what you're trying to achieve in a communication sense. So I think it's impossible to maintain neutrality or ultimate truth when it comes to communication in that sense. I think that people are, because that changes all the time. Because I could say, well, according to my ethical understanding in today's world, as we've evolved and progressed and all the rest of it, then this is the communication of this time, and these are the ground rules, and this is what we can say and what we can't say, and that changes all the time. And so for me, nobody's having honest conversation. And I think for me, the big thing is, intention is a big word in the whole thing. But the intention can't be aligned with a societal intention or with a company intention as well. So for me, that's why I went into this whole heart-based leadership. In traditional cultures and going back, we spoke about the heart. They speak about the heart being your source of reasoning, source of understanding, but not understanding in the rational sense, because anything you put through a rational filter comes in one way or the other, and it's very open to interpretation as well. So yeah, I think that honest conversation needs to be had again, but it's almost like returning back to childlike state in a sense, but not in that, but it's that free sense of understanding, and that what linked me into understanding the teachings from Zen, from the very, you could call it simplistic. I don't know if you read Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna is a Indian sage who wrote a text. He speaks about this tetralemma. The tetralemma is 4 equally valid propositions. You have the dilemma, which is 2 valid propositions, but then you take it to 4. Like, it could be right, it could be wrong, it could be right and wrong, or it could be none. It could be right, it could be not right, or it could be wrong. Now, all 4 would be equally valid propositions, and the more you scale into thought and deductive analysis, the more it's open to, it could be your point, it could be my point, this could be our ethical understanding, no, that could be the reasoning why we do this and that. And so on the one level, for you to go into in honest communication, it would be saying what you feel, but coming from a place of great trust within oneself, love within oneself, and then expecting and giving that same type of feedback out there. But this radical honesty has been changed so much. It's not a radical honesty. It's actually saying hurtful things. A lot of the times it's like, well, don't hold yourself back. But why are you thinking that thought in the first place, that you need to be radically honest? Because you're not being honest. What you're doing is you're judging the other person. So it gets, for me, it's I have a longer theory of understanding that.
Yeah, that's resonates well, I must say. It makes complete sense how we are used to using or framing the world in rational sense, because again, this is how our culture works, and this is how you get to speak to people and get things done. But then clearly this language of the heart is just winning. We can see how it's winning when you just show up authentically, and you show up to care. And it can be hurtful, like you say. It can be a byproduct of doing that, can be still a weaponizing. An aspect of it will be a weapon in some context that you cannot even predict, maybe a lot of the time. You cannot even predict. And so there's always this, you always contain whatever the positive you try to pose, it always contains that negativity somewhere, if it's latent, whether it's intended or not. But then, like you said, the intention is key, because whether it's intended to harm or is it intended to heal and to do any good in the world, which determines it. But then obviously that very mechanism is being weaponized, right? So people we can get misled by narratives that put us in a situation where doing bad things is perceived by the majority as being a good person, for example, which is classic, right?
Yeah.
So this order of the heart, which now seems to be, because I also believe we already are in the post-scientific, post-secular age. We are in AD as it were, because there are many reasons for that. Like there's something like 150 papers produced every day in any one area of science. So there's no one scientist who can actually be expert in their own field. Yeah. Then we have a few months ago GPT-3 already, before it became more advanced as it is now, could produce 2 papers. One giving evidence of vaccines being safe and effective with real references and real studies, and showing that they are harmful and not effective and unsafe. Same with real science. So then what does science become? And then we have the replication crisis, when people can't really, scientists can't produce science that is truly universal, because there's economic imperatives shaping what science is and isn't, and so on and so forth.
So for me to just sorry to interrupt you, but I agree that 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 yeah, even before ChatGPT and all the rest of our analysis, if you look at any scientific paper or research, there's always the alternative proposition that stood just as valid. If you look at PhD thesis and all the rest of it, so I think that I agree with you, but I don't think that it's. I think where we at you describe well, but I don't think we're post scientific dialogue. I think that what we're getting into is a state of apathy beyond. If you look at the human condition in relation to truth, is a sense of apathy rather than a sense of empowerment. So, because of what you mentioned, is that there's two equally valid propositions that are entirely true. How does someone decide on what is true and what is valid and in yourself? It's again this is a very good topic to talk about, because so kindness, what is kindness, right? And we look at how these words have been used, like you're a good person in that particular way. So you have these two opposing narratives and dialogues. One is saying, well, a good person goes and kills the terrorist, and the other person say, well, doesn't that make you a terrorist because you're a bad person? So in that way, good or bad, right or wrong, correct interpretation, incorrect interpretation. What does that lead to in the psyche of a human being? I don't think it may be beyond where we are right now in the scientific age, but I think that is the predominant age which will continue to confuse, to disempower individuals, because if you take that individually, you don't even know what's right and wrong anymore. If we just look at how we were talking about marketing strategy, how do you decide that based on purely rational thinking, purely on scientific analysis, purely on comparison, right? Using your example of the vaccine. I'm just adding on to what you were saying. So continue. In what you were saying.
Absolutely. Yes. So see, this is very important, because you say there are two propositions and they are equally valid but seemingly contradictory.
Yeah.
And it's similar. I always try to refer to this idea of, the quantum physics, where a particle is only a particle. It's the reality can be measured, depending on the instruments you use. It can be either
and the observer
exactly, and the observer using the tool. So it can be either a particle or a wave, but not both at the same time. And it's similar. It's in a way like, so you can use the tool of the mind and reason, and you can use the heart. And often they are in conflict. And when they are in conflict, we get the apathy, we get the paralysis of not knowing what to do, how to make decisions, and so on and so forth. And it seems to me that there's a lot of this binary thinking. We are used to this binary thinking for a reason. Like for me, really, when I studied Hegel a few years ago, I committed to 1 year of deep study to understand this philosopher, which is, I believe, one of the most comprehensive philosopher of history of West. But also he incorporates the East into it in Western language. So, and as I was tracking back his critique of the Enlightenment, which he was the proponent of, actually, he was one of the key flagship kind of philosophers for the Enlightenment at the beginning of the Enlightenment, which was most grand and amazing. He already saw the limits of it. And as many interpreters kind of agree, it's this split into duality, really, where we have one or the other, and the game theory and all of that kind of the protocols which emerge from it. We have the Plato, is the rational world, the ideal world, and then this kind of reflection of the real world. So already splitting human experience into some kind of out there. And then we had the monotheism emerging after that. And then we had Descartes, who said subject and object, which further kind of entrenches us in this kind of dualistic thinking, one or the other. As Dr. McGilchrist, he argues it's the whole process of this kind of splitting into, there's a lot of left hemisphere stuff going on, and right being this imaginative kind of more lateral thinking is becoming kind of becoming a slave of this, enslaved to this more inferior way of thinking. Yeah, this instrumental kind of thinking. And then we have then Immanuel Kant and so on. So anyway, there's just the kind
Well, Aristotle is a key figure to mention in that.
Yes, so Aristotle also with his logic, yes, binary logic, and although I kind of looked in through Plato, but yeah, Aristotle was kind of brought things slightly back to life, right? Because he considered soul to be like the functionality of the body, and but his logic is kind of also what is out of time. So it's disembodied, it's decontextualized, his logic, and that's the kind of motor. The kind of motor power of the analytic philosophy and so on and so forth. But yeah, just to go back,
that is the to me the beginning of the binary understanding of the world of form, is that put everything into specific categories in order to somehow simplify Plato, but he complicated it because he contextualized it in a particular way, and now you have, okay, is it black or white? It can't be black and white. We need to have some kind of clarity. But in the process of getting clarity is like you have to make that split. You have to make that differentiation. And in the process, you make a fatal mistake because you're using logic in order for you to separate that, excluding all these other things that you can't quantify. And as like quantum physics is now brought into the thing, is in fact it can be a wave and it can be a particle precisely at the same time. It's simply how you're observing it, and the instrument at which you're looking at, that same instrument, if it's able to encompass both things, will see wave and particle at the same time. So it is in that particular way a wave and a particle. So when you put that onto Aristotelian logic, you're broken in that particular way. So now if you take all of this, is like, is he a good man or is he a bad man? So you have your little logical threads or analytical reasoning. Well, according to my list, if he talks about LGBTQ, then he goes into the bad category if he talks bad about them. And now you have a split in that particular way, because he can't be talking negatively about LGBTQ and then yet talking positively about another transgender type of thing. And that's what happened with Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle said, well, you put me into this particular category and how I associate with transgender people. And he was talking about his close friend who was transgender. So now this is where you get this entire complication and of course Descartes being again, all with good reasoning. Again, we talk about intention in that way, and you can see that these people all had great intentions, right? You could say that. Even Nietzsche, even Heidegger, and look at what they've done with Heidegger and Nietzsche on their own, putting them into particular categories, associating them with, neo-Nazi, and even if you look at the great German composer at the time,
Wagner. Yeah?
Wagner, right? Look what they did with him as well. And so
Wagner, I think actually he was well committed anti-Semite, and that's why Nietzsche actually split from Wagner, but again,
also, if you look closely into it, you may find something different, like how we've categorized one thing or the other. And you can hold on to one particular code of ethics and principles, like for instance Putin, right? Everybody's put Putin into the bad category, right? And he's a bad man because he's what he's done in Ukraine. Yeah. Again, you'd find something that could contradict that as well. And I'd like to keep that level of awareness open.
Absolutely. Yes. I think it's just what builds what causes my distrust to most of the formal official discourse is that people who are otherwise very sophisticated and are capable of reasoning on a granular level, they fall into these ready-made opinions because it's just too socially dangerous to not do it, right? And this is very dangerous but they often, those are the people who don't really understand human psychology, and they don't understand they are training themselves to be downgraded into poorer thinkers because they don't have the courage to actually think and actually ask questions. But I wanted to go back to what you said about these thinkers who, like, Aristotle and Plato and Descartes, and which now we can look back and watch them as what we consider, okay, inaccuracies of the judgment and the doctrines, which they were genius thinkers who maybe misapplied certain insights. But then also, through Heidegger, we can say all of those insights and developments in culture were necessary, right? So it's like all that has been had to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Which is
now, yeah, it's like
which is personal as well, right? As well, and
yes,
how you
it's a
personalize.
non-linear process.
Give me a second. I need to use the bathroom. Give me 2 minutes. I'll be back.
Sure. Okay.
Sorry about that, Adam.
No worries. So yeah, I'll just try to keep this thought fresh in my mind about, because the split is the main thing, and the fragmentation of our perception and relatedness in this sense as well, and seeing the other as not kind of another aspect of myself and myself in the other, etc. Right?
Yeah.
Because the mind needs duality, the mind needs this kind of distance to actually be able to observe, and but then the heart doesn't know that. The heart is kind of is at one with the soul of the world, if you like, and that's where this Platonic, or you'd argue in terms of logic, Aristotelian paradigm, but basically that the dualistic paradigm ended up really bifurcating religion from science in our age, right?
Yeah.
And it's very there are few people who actually, because it does seem so contradictory, but that was actually, what my some of my mentees and students were my best teachers, really, because I had this mentee, and now he's at Oxford. I think he's about to graduate. He's philosophy and theology at Oxford. But I was like, when I started mentoring him, he was in his, it was like year 10 or something. And he's from a religious family, so he was religious, but he was very intellectual. And for me, it was like I was like a heretic. And when I started, I was still into my music, my metal, my kind of anti-religious, stance. But then I observed him, and as he was developing as well, I tried to kind of role model best attitudes and best kind of practices, how to achieve, the best for himself. And then I was trying to kind of, okay, so there are people, and I met other people who are highly intellectual and very spiritual in a sense, in a sound sense. I myself, I was born in Poland in a Roman Catholic family, so that kind of cheap version of religiosity, in many ways. When you have this mass, people just do what the neighbors, do, and basically there's little awareness of that.
Well, that could apply to all religions, really.
Applies to any mass. Is like anything on mass becomes kind of cheap because people don't have to work for it, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think it's the individual in that rather than the collective mass. I think it is how the individual applies to the mass in that way, rather than the religion being mass. In my understanding, you go to Buddhists in Japan, and they are, some of them are extremely religious, integrating Shinto, for instance, in Japan, and they're extremely puritanical in that particular interpretation. So I don't think it's the religion en masse. But anyway, I don't want to stop you there. So you were mentioning about about your student or your mentee.
Yes, and the coherence. It just made me think, because then you develop a relationship and you watch and you witness and you kind of see the coherence between the intellectual and the spiritual within that, and then you learn. And I think that really helped me to. There has been a well, and there has been a movement within me, like thinking, and then also I was quite passionate about Nietzsche, realizing that you can't just give up on the idea of God. You can't just give up on we are religious beings as human beings, and suddenly we have all the toys, we have the technologies, and we, without realizing, we project that religious instinct onto the toys and onto all the capacities that we have gained through that power. Yeah, so it's like a Faustian trade, as it were. Like Spengler talks about this Faustian deal that the Western humanity has done, and then it dragged because of the rest of the world had to continue, like had to chase it as well, not to be outnumbered and so on, and outcompeted. And now we are in this kind of sorry state as the whole of humanity, because the West has dragged consciousness into this kind of this split between it's all science and no religion, or the people who believe that religion is like, they must be like Luddites living in a cave, and it's very difficult to challenge that. And I think there's like Jacob Burckhardt said that, this historian of culture in mid 19th century. It was like a Swiss famous specialist of the Renaissance, and he said, in the most kind of advanced and the richest, or the most advanced, no, advanced again is colonized, because advanced means advanced technology, but in the healthiest stage, sophisticated, healthiest stage of a culture is where you have culture or civilization, when you have culture, science, and religion on one team, basically complementing one another. And that's what happened in the Renaissance. Yeah? You had Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and all this great art and all the culture, and then you had.
Well, let's not forget about the Persians and the Arabs as well in that conversation as well.
Before that, can you draw that picture as well because these works came from Constantinople, and you kept or like the all the works from the burnt Library of Alexandria were transported and translated into Arabic, right? Kept in Constantinople, and until the Renaissance, they were kept there. So, can you tell us about that part of the story as well?
Well, I mean, there was no separation. Before I get into that, I want to come back to this point: is how things have been named differently. So, we take the words that you've used, and you said religion, we said science. These two words are very much changed in their context as well. So if you look at the scholars of the Arab world, and you could call it an Islamic empire, especially with Andalusia being a very key point, which was in Spain, people used to come from all over, especially the Greeks as well. They used to come learn Arabic and then gain that knowledge. It was never science and religion on the separate side. It was never separated. Again, religion and spirituality is again being separated again, and religion in the sense of a belief system or a set of principles and mandates that we follow, including what God or what prophet, all the rest of it in that religious sense, is again convoluted. The same with the word love, or the same with the word God. All of these things have changed meaning over time. Even what it means to be a man now, we've changed as well. What it means to be a woman. So I think this is something that I want you to talk about and elaborate as well. So yeah, it was that there was no separation. You had the scientists who would write treatises on spirituality, and a lot of the great scientists were actually Sufis, and Sufis in the sense of they were very connected to spirit, to, you could say, Platonic in a way, and they took a lot from Aristotle, as they did as well from Plato as well. So there was this collaboration. There was never this exclusion. And just saw a video recently how they've made the East and the West. And if you look at so many things that have come from the West, from the East, apparently the East. We could call it the Arabs, you could call it the Persians, you could call it Iran, Afghanistan, India. The separation, when you look at even Sanskrit as a language, it all originated in East. Even what we're speaking, most languages, European, Eurocentric languages, came from there. But they created this sort of split, but there never was. It was this continuation in that particular dialogue, and even you could say there was no separation between the Buddhist understanding of existence and the monotheistic understanding. If you link them, if you take the monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and look at the spiritual element and understand that at its core, and if you take the Buddhist understanding, and that was my book that I wrote, combining sort of the two, the mystical understanding or the dimensions, and of course, understanding is not in understanding in the mind, right? It's more of a feeling, of a sensing. When I'm sitting with a Zen master and he's telling me about the nature of existence, and I'm sitting with a Sufi master, I see precisely the same information being transmitted. The words are slightly different, but the essentialness of the nature of reality, the nature of human beings, and then we get into language, and then we get into dialogues, and we get into separations as well in a particular way. So in broad context, but the whole language thing, I think we're really stuck here because there was never any disagreement. We knew God was a reference point. Like you'd have a Christian and a Muslim sitting together, and one would say, well, I think that Jesus is God, and the other person would be having that. They'll say, okay, well, let's put that on the table and let's continue with our scientific exploration. So you'd get the Greeks coming to learn Arabic, taking the knowledge from that and understanding it in that particular way, but never that separation. There was never separation. Science and religion and spirituality were one thing.
Yes, you see, so you touched on, because through the lens of Sufism is just for people who watch, it's an esoteric Islam, right? It's a mysticism within, from the Islamic tradition. And I think this is what really got me into religion as well. I mean, religion, because again, when we say religion, people see churches and priests and whatnot, and synagogues, but I think what really got me into the spirituality is it's realizing that all religions really at the core are about one thing. It's just they speak language of different peoples who happened to interpret things in the terms of their community, etc., but then the key of it is to recognize the sameness across all those divisions. But as the I suppose, language, once you start writing things, and then the language, that what is being described in language is reified as a thing, in a dogmatic way, that this is literal, and you can't have control over people's misreading stuff and misrepresenting. Then you have people fighting over things that are the opposite of religion in a way, because they create conflict, right? So the opposite of the divine is what creates division and conflict. But then that becomes the unnecessary component of scaling religion, as it were. No, because
but just before you get into scaling religion, to go back, it's not really for me that to look at the commonalities in all religions in the totality, even though I did mention that before, because the type of religion or the type of belief system or structure that you embody has an output on the type of character and the view of the world that you have in that particular way. And it doesn't, the end result is not a bad thing or a good thing, is what you decide to ascribe to in how you want to express yourself, your community, your relation to your creator and the universe around you. So there is a certain outcome. It's like if you're German speaking, that entire Germanness, even though it embodies the language, will reveal a certain type of individual in how they see the world as well. So and all of them would lead you to a path of your own expression of life from how you inherently want that to be expressed. So there is that alignment. They're not all the same. they don't all lead to the same expression. They don't all lead to the same understanding. At the end, yes, but individually, there's an expression. So for me, when I looked at Buddhism, but not Buddhism in just Buddhism, but if you look at the extractions, because even in Buddhism you had all these different splits, and then you look at Islam, for instance, in the Sufi expression, and then if you look at the Christian, for instance, mysticism, which incorporates again, mysticism is a word that has been changed around as well. Again, then we have this separation between I'm not a religious person, I'm a spiritual person. Again, you've made another fatal mistake in that particular way. Like the most religious person you could find would be someone who believes in pureness, in goodness, in all the rest of it in that expression as well. So it's going back for you to continue on. I just wanted to clarify my interpretation on that.
Absolutely, and I think what we're basically demonstrating through this conversation is that we're also using English language, which happens to be most, one of the most useful interfaces we have available, and we happen to be wielding it well enough.
I don't know about useful, but it is
sure, it could be different. Different ones have different. They bring about different qualities of speech, right? But I mean, it's practical for this time in history. And what I want to say is that we end up talking about these things as if they were nouns again, right? Religion, understanding, like we already are within the matrix set up by Aristotle, Plato, Descartes, and so on. So we cannot avoid. This is Heidegger for us, where we realize that this matrix itself, the very tools through which we seek to understand each other's perspectives, is flawed and provides inaccurate means, right?
You hit the nail on the head there.
Right. And the one thing is, like, we cannot escape it. However, we can notice it being there. Just in the same way we can notice that thing. I am brought in a particular culture. I'm a Muslim, I'm a Christian, I'm an atheist, whatever it may be. And that doesn't mean that it's all relative, because it's not, like you said, it's not just relative. It's meaningful that I belong somewhere, that I have my roots, and that I am who I am because of a sequence of generations before me having been who they were, etc., etc. But then the point is, also it's fascinating, first time in history, we have all this data and we can look through it and understand even the nature of our own language, which both reveals and conceals at the same time.
Yep.
And what would I say to track back to our... And because of that, you see, we
just to add on to what
go ahead.
You get your train of thought back there, but so the how language is the language that we speak and how we're perceiving the world, we don't realize, but just the words that we use in the language that we speak is already veiling us so much from an understanding of another human being. But if you look at it from a sense perception, everything that we're interpreting, 98% of all frequencies out in the universe, I think 99%, we can't perceive, even though they exist. If you look at all the different dimensions that exist out there, which we don't know they exist or not, but we can, if we use our senses and then our language faculties, which is very much based on tense as well. If you look at present tense, past tense, and all the rest of it, other languages, you can say, I'll see you there yesterday. And it would be entirely valid in certain languages. So that wouldn't make sense if you take that into English. Sometimes the verbs, the nouns, it's all hidden in the language that we speak. So we can't even be having, but what you said was critical, is that we can't stop speaking a particular language or interpreting a certain way. But we have to be, as you mentioned about the blind spot, we have all this huge blind spot within us in order to see the world. Even if we look at Descartes and we look at, Heidegger, I think in that way really realized the fundamental issue in language. So But these other people, if you look at it from speaking English or German or one of these languages, especially based on Sanskrit in that particular way, you are going to interpret and see things. And for you, that is entirely correct. Now, does that mean he was wrong? No. From his level of awareness and interpretation, it was great. The problem we have now is that if you have a broader context society with languages from all over the world, you've got East, you got West, you got, and then you look at, South America, and all these great civilizations have been majorly excluded in our worldview. We talk East and West, but we never talk sort of South and North in that particular way, where there's a lot of things from African cultures. We look at South American as well, and even Aborigines in Australia as well, which add a lot of dimension and depth. Is that we're going to have to come up with, as far as my long contemplation about this, we're going to have to come up with a set of rules and standards and how we decide to interface with each other based on underlying principles. I don't believe there's any other way, because everything else is open to interpretation. So we're going to have to come to a common position. And I see this, and a lot of people, not a lot of people, but whoever I said this to say, well, it doesn't make sense. But this, to me, after my examination, in my simplistic and humble way, there is no other way to be able to come to commonality unless we agree on certain principles. And where I see this predominantly collapsing, I see the age that are coming up now with AI, the end of relationships. And I'm talking about spousal relationships, and then I'm talking about social relationships, and then whatever that means. I think religion will take on a new meaning altogether, and religiosity and scientism will take on an entirely a new thing altogether. So unless at some point, because if you look at the rules of relationships as well, you're a man, this is what you're supposed to do. You're a woman, that's what you're supposed to do. Now a man is no longer the hunter taking care of the woman. The woman says, well, I can do whatever I want. So all those rules that have applied, say, to Christianity, and people say, well, it's because of things that were done. This whole victim mindset, which I don't ascribe to. Right? Again, we could blame Descartes for the Cartesian split that we face today, or Aristotle, but that's not the way to look at history and to look at our progress as a human being. So the only way is you're going to have to say, okay, you're the wife, I'm the husband. This is how we're going to form our foundations and our principles. When we have disagreements and agreements, now people, I don't see the practical implementation in my own particular way. Yet I do in my family and in my home. I can taking this into a corporate structure. I don't know how that's going to work practically, but I don't see any other way.
Yes, it seems that this is our issue, because we need more collective intelligence to even solve any of the problems that we are facing, right? We need more brain power to think about things, and some agreement, more agreement, less polarization, more agreement, and some.
Sorry, what do you mean more thinking, more agreement?
More like communication means hopefully reaching agreement rather than fighting. So
everybody's agreeing on the internet. You see that everybody's afraid to disagree. So I don't think we need more agreement.
Yes, I mean, yeah, fair enough. But they do it within the tribes, right? We do it within our bubbles of echo chambers. So you're not really.
There's so much nobody saying anything, even in our private chambers. People are not speaking honestly. They're not speaking their hearts. Because I think the entire society is based on fear. It's based on the whole thing that if I say, then my wife will leave me, and if I do this, then my boss will leave me, and if you're in China, then my credit score will go down. Even individually. So what people end up doing is hitting the pub or taking some drugs just to make sense of it. That's my interpretation. We're not even having this kind of conversation with ourselves. We're not. Yeah. I mean, we're not even facing our own hypocrisies, right? We talk about disagreement, like, I think he's wrong. He shouldn't have done that. How many times can you take on your ego and say, actually, I think you were wrong in that particular way? Let's be honest about it. We can't even have that conversation. So I think more disagreement, but not from the level of thought, because that will go on forever.
Critical readjustment of thinking. just
Sorry to cut you off there, but
yeah, I get your point. Absolutely. I mean, what I mean is in alignment with this, but because
alignment.
with an alignment, because it's the so you it's so it's not really an agreement. It's a substitute. It's an illusion of agreement in a way, because you never let oneself. No, people don't let themselves speak out and hear their own thoughts and see the backlash, or see the live through the consequences to alter that can alter their own thinking and actions and so on. That would be transformative for the species, but obviously it's increasingly inconvenient to do that. Although I don't know, like also the ones who started, they see it's an illusion, really. It's
I think it's the only way to me. I think not the only way, but I think it's a very healthy way where we all, and that's why my whole model has been based on, sorry to stop you there, is that let's know thyself. Know thy own self, as the Arabs call it, the nafs, or the ego. Know it, understand it, and process it deeply, and realize your own blind spot and be open. But you can only have someone looking at your blind spot if they've examined their own. That's why you go to a Zen master or a spiritual master who's become so aware of his own self, if you want to call it that. And the ego is not to be demolished and broken. That's not my understanding of it. It's supposed to be understood, being compassionate towards it, and integrate into that particular way. And that's the Sufi, again, environment as well, because you are created this way. But you must know that, the most attractive thing that I find in a human being is humility, is that ability, but not fake humility. It's like saying, you know what, I think you're wrong. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. And that is humility in its ultimate sense. Because he's saying, I'm open. Tell me why I'm wrong. And then you can approach that with that honesty. And in that particular way, you're now forming people that are not pointing at each other's fingers going, you see, your ego is bad like that. Because you've examined your own ego.
You know yourself. Yeah, you're
right. So if I say to you, I think you're wrong, immediately you say, oh, you're probably right. But in the modern day society, I say, you think you're wrong. You go, how dare you?
Yeah,
tell me why. Right. So there you have your fundamental breakdown. So knowing thyself, again, very deeply, and I think that's going to save us in the upcoming age as well. Knowing how first of all, how you're perceiving reality. Your senses are deceiving you in the first place. Then your thoughts, how they're deceiving you in that way. Know how many. So in ancient traditions, the heart did the thinking. If you read this wonderful book on D.T. Suzuki on archery, he said, think through your heart and see, and think through your heart and see through your mind. So what used to happen is that, remember, if you look at our body's mechanisms, the thoughts are the only things that are on autonomous mode. They continue. You move your hand, it's in the conscious radar. Of course, your livers are processing and all the other functions are happening in your body. But you can do this type of function, but you're sitting there and your mind just racing around. So if you look at it, the understanding of from the ancient times, the knowledge, I would use the word knowing rather than understanding, is that you understand or perceive reality through your heart, and you watch the chatter. You don't partake in the chatter saying what is right and what's wrong, because by nature the brain is an organ of polarity. You have left and right. You're not going to come to you understand. The only way is the heart, because the heart's an organ of singularity. But again, heart is understood in two particular dimensions as well. And the ancient dimension that goes into all cultures and religions is that you memorize by heart. It's hidden in the language. We memorize by heart. How can we be memorizing by heart? Right? Yes. Or you know someone by heart. Even your identity. If I say, who are you over there? You'll say, who, me? Why do you do this? Because you know it's here. But if it was just an organ pumping blood, then you'd say, who, me? Here. But you don't. Yeah, in essence, that way I think but please do continue. Yeah.
That's great. And that's critical, you see. This is where we become blind to something we do all the time as well, right?
Yes,
like we're blind to the function that our a particular language that we happen to use has on our thinking and understanding and self-relating. Same, yes, I think. I think.
Exactly.
What was I? I had some thoughts as you were talking, but I don't know where to start now. I lost it.
Well, the thing is, thoughts in many ways separate us. And there's this something from Carl Jung, which is really interesting. Is sorry, did you remember what you were going to say?
Yeah, keep that thought. So I say, because it seems like so the mind has hijacked the understanding of the heart in a way, and then once you over intellectualize things, your heart kind of forgets. Like it's not so
Yes.
easy, because then you read the study saying, oh, intuition is not reliable, because it isn't really. You cannot verify, you cannot measure its reliability, but you can measure, looking back at your life, when your gut feeling was right, and when it was wrong, when you acted on it or not acted on it, and what happened after. Yeah, so
But you can take the same confusion when it comes to measurement as well. When it comes to an analytical measurement, yes, you can come to a conclusion based on your estimate in a confined vacuum space of your analysis of distance, for instance, from here to here, right? So you could say from left hand to right hand, that's the distance. But have you acknowledged and understood the variables of the universe as around us as well? The earth spinning at a particular rate. If you throw a piece of metal from this sand to this sand, you've encompassed and understood gravity in its finite particular way. But if you look at the earth rotating at whatever 27,000 kilometers per hour or per second, and you look at the Milky Way in the galaxy, how accurate is your interpretation of this, even if you apply your rational? Because we say, no, we can trust thought and we can trust rational analysis. No, it's still flawed. It's just that if you
yes.
think about it, all science comes to a particular, even in your life, you say, should I buy the blue car or the white car? And you do your ultimate rational inquiry and analysis. At the end of the day, the decision you make is going to be what your heart decides.
Right, and it's because you decontextualize it, and science has to decontextualize. That means reduce the meaning of any one thing that it tries to analyze to deliver results that are analytic. And I think, going back to the self-knowledge, and self-deception and self-knowledge, these are not, again, opposites or polarity. They are polarities, but they are both, like, the self-deception process, and noticing your own self-deception is contributing to your self-knowledge, in fact, right? Like you said, recognizing your ego, recognizing where you bullshit yourself, enhances your wisdom about yourself and consciousness. So, and I think that because that has been kind of hijacked in modern civilization, so anything non-rational is just frowned upon because it's not scientific, or it's not, you can't put a digit on it or something. It falls outside of the discourse because you cannot verify, you cannot put a number on it or a graph. And now this trajectory will be hijacked by AI, which will lead to further detachment of the individual from oneself, from self-knowledge, right? Because there'll be more and more sugar-coated, beautiful things to do with AI, and
they're building upon that fundamental flaw of perception of reality. They can, if that becomes the only way you see your reality, they can build upon that and take it to all extremes, like
exponentially, you said. Right? And then that becomes an exponential tool for colonizing the reality, even of those who understand what we're talking about now, because then that becomes the norm. That becomes then written into law, and suddenly you can't just have a conversation like this because it's radical. You're radicalizing the population or something like that, right? Like, they're already doing it, I think, with podcasts. They're targeting podcasts, saying, like, you can't have free speech, people talking about anything they like because it's dangerous. And it's this.
Yeah, but what is free speech then, isn't it? It really gets into a bind. What is free speech? So so what ends up happening is that nobody says what they mean anymore. This is what we have today. Nobody says what they mean anymore.
Yeah. It's just pretending. It's instrumental use of language again. Like, I have to say this like this because that will mean I will keep my job and my partner won't leave me. And
but all of it has one fundamental element that binds it all together: fear. Because they can only force you to say, do whatever, is because you could lose your job, you could lose your spouse, you could lose this, you could lose that. So the whole entire thing, if you look at from COVID and from all the diseases and the war on terror and the entire America's been for 90% of its time at war, right?
Right.
And people forget that America's a tiny little empire in the blot of history of how long they've been around as well. So the entire, and of course people, it's from Machiavellian times or even before that, that people have, or people in power, or people who want to get you to conform into a particular box. And that's where Nietzsche and all these other type of revolutionaries are saying to you, step out of that. Because once you, and that's where again the Mevlevi, who, you know, Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, the famous poet, who was Mevlevi, he was all about love. And he said if a man is in love, you can't terrify him,
Yeah.
because he will do anything. He's invincible. So once you become, so people say, well, stop fearing. No, you've got to understand your fear. You got to know your fear. You got to look straight in the eyes and say, and then you've got to follow your heart. So for me, my whole thing has been to take it back to me and understanding myself, and then with my clients as well, in working in that particular way, and just my friends as well in that circle, is that you can't, if a man is clear of himself or herself, if a person's clear of their own ego, of their own being, and they know their heart, and their heart is filled with love, it's very impossible to deceive them. You can't come with rational framework and they'll say, well, you're just as right and I'm just as wrong, but that doesn't really matter. Why are we doing what we're doing? There's no, the whole rationality collapses, because I'm not afraid anymore of saying to you what I want to say, because I love you. And that doesn't gel with, like, you know, it's like the man coming to shoot another person, and that person says, your safety switch is on. I think if you really want to kill me, you should take that off, you know. Or another man coming with a sword, and you say, and you grab the sword and you put it in your own stomach, and you say, will this help you a bit? It doesn't add up to that. What are you doing here? Because and you mentioned it some time ago, that if you don't know your own psychological framework and how easily you are deceived and manipulated by your own thought processes, it's very easy for someone else to be able to do that. And you said the people don't have the courage to go in and ask these questions and do it, to think of how these thoughts and how their interaction is shaping their fear-based reality.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that this courage, people talk about courage as outward thing, going on the social media and say, I'll go and speak to others. No, I mean, you are the ultimate judge of yourself, right? So you have to be first courageous to actually notice that these aspects exist, and they will always exist within you. What you are ashamed of, what do you fear, what you're scared, the abyss of the part of yourself. That's Carl Jung. I suppose you would say something about, because Carl Jung has done a good job, you know, linking the Western with the Eastern as well. And yeah, for me it was and mysticism with psychiatry. So I think we are there. We're inching our way out of this ignorance now. We have enough knowledge, we have enough data. Now all we need is more conversations like these, and, you know, hopefully 1, 2, 3 centuries, if we make it through this kind of little, you know, blip, existential blip that we're in, this will scale nicely. And I do believe what you're saying is true, that self-knowledge will basically save us, and we will be our own salvation if we choose to, you know ourselves really, because only then we will be able to recognize deception for what it is,
and truth for what it is as well.
Sorry?
Yeah. And truth for what it is as well.
And truth, yes.
Yeah.
And again, you see, and truth, and also know the price of both, because that means, you know, there will be more and more tempting and seductive ways of buying our souls, basically, right? Technologically mediated, fantastical new strategies, like, wow, it's just the way to be, and everyone does it, and all the celebrities do it.
You know, Adam,
you have to have this kind of strength to say, like, well, that's very glamorous, but no, fuck you. Like, I'm not doing this
Yeah,
shit.
but that would be a very interesting talk on its own. That particular point about how are we going to manage it, because to me, ultimately, it comes to our three brains or our three different centers: intellect, instinct, and intuition, and how we're going to be able to shape that in our reasoning. Because if we and I'd like to take that into a much further discussion, the amygdala and our ape-like behavior, a lot of it, social behavior, and all the rest of it, very much shaped on that, and why we are afraid of doing certain things and why we're not. I think that would be a fascinating conversation, but I think we'll leave it there for now. It was most interesting and very it was a proper type of conversation that needs to be had. There's not many of these conversations happening, so thank you so much for that, Adam.
Likewise, very, very interesting to explore these things, which usually I just, think to myself. So I find thinking in dialogue is so much more exciting, isn't it? And now, especially when we can share it and get some feedback, that's invaluable. So thanks for the opportunity, and I look forward to the next one.